Hey, welcome back to the UPRAWR Podcast. Today we sit down with Danny from Roadrunner Records, one of the biggest record labels in the world. He's worked on marketing campaigns with bands such as Green Day, Slipknot and the Red Hot Chillis. We talk about the difference between the campaigns on massive bands like those and small emerging bands. So let's get straight into it.
Awesome. I guess the starting point then is, how did you get started in the industry?
It's no like amazing origin story. It's it's probably quite straight ahead. I basically was at uni, did a degree, and I hadn't really thought about working in music or even trying to work in music. It felt quite like a mysterious thing at that point. So it wasn't really on my radar until the very end of uni. Obviously, I love music, I gigs all the time and clubs and stuff like that. But right at the end, I saw a graduate training program for one of the majors as an option that you could do, which I applied for, and I don't actually think I ever heard back. But at that point, my eyes were open to that was a possibility actually to do something like that. But then I was just unemployed for a little bit. Went on a government-funded marketing course to learn a bit about marketing, because my degree was in economics, so wanted to learn more about marketing stuff. And then they said on that, we'll try and get you a placement with some kind of marketing work at some point in the 10 weeks or the end of the 10 weeks. And they said, what kind of stuff would you want to do? So I said, I'd love to do music. And they were like, yeah, that doesn't really happen here. And then literally halfway through the course, they said, this guy who manages some bands is looking for someone to come in and be his assistant for 6 months as a kind of starting point. Would you be up for doing it? And obviously just jumped straight at the chance and went to that straight away. So he had a 2 or 3 smaller artists, but it was just a really amazing experience just to get your foot in the door and start working with bands and learning the kind of process of how it all worked.
Awesome, man. Did you feel like you learned more in that, just working with the bands and getting into it, than you did doing the courses, or was it?
Oh yeah, definitely. I always think just from working all my career, working within a label or just being a magazine for a bit or whatever, that just actually being part of that process, you learn so much more than someone kind of trying to teach you the basics. I actually remember I bought a book on the music industry. There was this book at the time that kind of told you everything about that you should know about each part of the industry. And it was actually really confusing to read. So you had no reference point. You'd never been doing it. So to then actually go in and do that stuff firsthand, all of a sudden it clicks, I think, when you can see it in action. And you see how it works, and it becomes kind of real to you. So yeah, definitely learning while you're doing it is definitely a key thing, I think.
So what were the sort of things you were doing then during that first?
I mean, it wasn't anything very glamorous, really. I was basically just the guy's assistant. So, I was doing really boring things like some of the accounts and stuff like that, but just fielding a lot of inquiries for the bands, organising bands' kind of schedules, all the kind of stuff that you need, organising travel for them, those kind of real basic things. But, there was some really cool, I think one of the biggest exciting thing was, I remember one of the bands we worked with were doing a festival in France. They were doing a TV performance on a big French TV channel as well. So I got to go with them on the tour bus. It was like, I was like 22, 23 or whatever. Went on the tour bus, did like 5 days with them, went to see a TV show being recorded in Paris, down to the south of France for this festival. It was amazing. It's kind of that's that moment you just go, wow, this is incredible. It's everything you thought it would be.
So was that the sort of point where you were just like, this is it, I'm in music?
A bit, I guess. Yeah, it becomes real at that point, because you're really ensconced in what you think, I guess, like rock and roll is. Do you know what I mean? It's like you always think about bands being on tour buses and going on tour and all that kind of stuff. So when you get to experience it properly for the first time, I mean, it's great. All the other stuff before that, go to gigs, meeting bands, meeting other people, is all really great. But yeah, this is like you get that real proper inside look into what it's like for those bands and how they tour. So yeah, it was really kind of the starting point.
Awesome, man. So how did you then progress on from there?
It was kind of a bit fortunate in a way. I stayed working at the management company for quite a while, and the guy that I worked for, went on to do a consultancy for Acid Jazz Records, which is where I ended up next. So we ended up moving into their offices while he was doing the consultancy, and I was kind of doing more and more stuff for him on his management side as well while he was doing that. So I got to learn a bit more. And we were in there, can't remember, like 6 months to a year or whatever, and I got to know everyone at Acid Jazz really well, and they were really great. And then that was coming to an end, and then they said, oh, you know, you really like guitar music. We're starting an indie guitar label as such, and we'd really like someone to run it. Would you be up for doing it? Which seemed insane at the time. You know, I think I'd been doing it for like a year and a half or something. But again, you just don't say no to these opportunities. So I said yes, and and then ended up doing that for them. It was called Focus. We had, you know, some really, it wasn't very big, but we had some really cool little bands and stuff. And there was like me and 3 other guys doing the label. We had a club night that we did in Hoxton before Hoxton had any of the stuff they had now. And it was really great, really fun. Lots of cool people came and DJ'd. And then that kind of went on for a few years. And then the label as a whole, Acid Jazz, kind of changed a bit. And, you know, as things happen, restructuring and moves and stuff like that. So kind of wound down the Focus indie label. And I ended up moving more into the main Acid Jazz part of the business. And then just kind of progressed through there in terms of doing some A&R, doing some marketing, learning the ropes, doing production, royalties. You know, you just basically, when you're in a small company like that, you have to just do everything and muck in, which is great experience for everything else you do afterwards, because then you really know the ropes and you know what's going on around you. So it was partly that, and then eventually ended up being the label manager for the label for a fair few years.
Oh, wow. That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
So the big jump then into rock was when you joined Roadrunner.
Yeah. I mean, I was always a big rock fan, you know. And so obviously Acid Jazz is a soul and funk label, really, traditionally. It was a lot of mod stuff. And so, yeah, it's a different genre altogether. But I mean, my music taste is very broad. So it was always great working on that anyway. But everyone just knew I was like a metal kid, really. And so I really wanted to do that all the time. So, yeah, so then I kind of progressed into the Roadrunner system at some point, yeah.
So how did you get the job with Roadrunner?
Really, again, it was just a really straight ahead thing. There was just an advert for a kind of rock metal label at one of the agencies, and like product manager. So I applied for it, had a few interviews, and just got the job. It was literally as simple as that. It was, and when I applied for it, I didn't actually know it was Roadrunner.
Right.
They wouldn't tell you until you actually got an interview. I think they told you exactly who it was at that point. But I couldn't believe it. I was mega excited because I'd bought so many Roadrunner records over the years. It was like an absolute dream. And I remember I was driving somewhere when I got the job, and got a call from the agency, so I had to like stop. I mean, I was like traveling up north, so I had to just stop off somewhere and then ring the guy, and then he told me I got the job. I was like mega excited. It was like one of the most exciting things I think that ever happened to me. It just felt like a real dream come true kind of.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. So when you applied then, did you just know it was a label?
I just knew it was a rock and a rock metal label.
Okay.
So I just didn't know. I didn't know which one. But I'd been at Acid Jazz for quite a few years at that point, and I felt like, because I'd done quite a lot of stuff, and I really knew the ropes around working for a label, and now I really wanted to apply that to something that I knew that I'd grown up really loving, just to have that extra kind of thing. So when it came along, it was like, right, that just seems like a good opportunity, no matter which label it is, right?
Yeah.
Getting into the kind of genre of stuff that I like. And I had a lot of friends already who were in the scene, you know. I knew people from like all the magazines and stuff like that. So it wasn't like I was a complete outsider just trying to pop into this thing. So it felt like a natural progression for me to be able to like finally work on all that stuff that I loved.
Do you think it was massively beneficial to you, like sort of long term, to come from something that was independent and to learn all those extra skills before just going into something huge where I guess your job was more defined?
Yeah, like 100%. I think I would always advise anyone, like, if you get the chance to work at an indie, because everything is completely different from working at a major. And I think when you work, well, Roadrunner wasn't really a major at that point when I first started, but even working within a major kind of distribution system, things are so different, and things can become a bit departmentalized and compartmentalized, I guess. So you kind of work on bits around you, but there's people to do stuff. Whereas an indie label, you just got to do everything. So I learned how to do things like artwork for albums, all the kinds of different ways of manufacturing, mastering, royalties, business affairs, contracts, all of that kind of stuff. So I think to have all that experience and then to bring that into somewhere else means that you've got a really good base level of what you're doing. But also when I went to Roadrunner, it was like, I thought I was, I thought, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing. I've done this for ages. And it's like, and then you step into that world and that system, and it such an amazing label, and the people so amazing that you just feel like it's a huge step up all of a sudden. I felt like it was, wow, this is intense straight away. But you learn quickly when it's in that kind of situation, and you're up to speed quite fast. Really, you have to be.
So, what sort of things were you working on right at the start?
I'm trying to think back now. What did I do? I think I did. I got to work on the first Slash with Miles and the Conspirators album. I got to do that. Oddly, I did we had an album with Lenny Kravitz back it, so I did that. I worked on Blackstone Cherry, and then we had some things where this kind of come full circle. At the time, Shinedown were on Atlantic, and because Roadrunner was kind of affiliated with Atlantic, the band did an album with us here. So I did the Amaryllis album. So I got sort of Shinedown, Hailstorm. I'm just trying to think. Man, it's a bit of a while ago. It was amazing because there were bands that I really loved, and all of a sudden you're working with them. It's like, wow, this is crazy,
I watched the Nickelback documentary, and one of the things that they said was that when they signed, the label was like a much more serious sort of metal label, and they felt like in the US they weren't taken seriously, or the bands didn't like them being on it because they weren't the right fit. Did that translate into the UK? Did it feel like that over here? Did you?
In terms of how the UK perceived them, do you think? Yeah, I think.
And with the other bands in the label and sort of like, because in the documentary they say that Nickelback were bringing in a huge amount of money and it was really helping the label, but other bands on it just didn't appreciate what was happening.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't know if I was close enough to what was going on at that point. Like, I wasn't there when they first signed at all, so I don't really know that I can say with like any authority that's yes or no. But I definitely feel like I can, I've seen that documentary and I think it's amazing. I think it's really good, and I actually think coming out of it, your respect for that band completely, like, if you didn't like them at all before, I think your respect switches completely for them.
Yeah.
And I think at the time, definitely there was kind of quite derided by, I guess, a lot of the cool music press.
Yeah.
And it did become an easy target to hit them. But like you say, they were selling millions and millions and millions of records, It's hard to argue.
Yeah. It's ridiculous to say that they're not cool when they're the most popular.
Yeah. It's funny, and this is going to get shot down for this, but I loved How You Remind Me. I mean, that's a brilliant song. You can't deny how great that is as a song. Do you know?
Absolutely, man.
It's so good. And they wrote some amazing, like, huge, when you watch that documentary, you go, wow, I forgot that track. It's really good. It's that track. So I think, their success is like massively deserved. It's just because people thought they didn't. I don't know. Maybe people didn't think that they paid their dues, but when you watch that film, you see that how much they did, and they released a couple of records on their own and did all that touring by themselves. So they definitely earned it.
What was it like then for you, where you got to work with bands like Slipknot, and they got a #1 album?
I mean, it's always amazing to work on Slipknot. It's like they're because they're so well known. Even my mum knew.
That's how you know.
Exactly. And I've worked with other big bands like, I worked with Green Day recently. I don't no disrespect because they're an amazing band and massive. But Mum didn't really know who Green Day were, but she knew who Slipknot were. But that's, I think, just because of all the stuff that came out when they came around. She's like, oh, they're the one with the mask. It's like, yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's incredible to work with a band like that who are so huge, whose fan base is like incredible. Having the #1 album was so good. I think I'd worked on a record before that was #2, so it was like, I guess it's like the pressure feels a little bit on because you want to deliver like a big record for them. And I think we just got the wrong week, and we sold a lot of records, but there was like I remember like George Ezra album out the same year that sold like incredible amount. But yeah, to get the next one to number one, and then we actually had a follow up. The last one we had a number one with as well, and so it's really amazing, and they're great. The team that they have behind them and their management are amazing to work with as well. And I work with them on lots of other projects that, different bands that they manage that are on our label as well. So yeah, it's really good. It's just like it's a proper well-oiled machine, and there's so much stuff going on around it and behind the scenes. And like I said, there's a fair bit of pressure on you because you really want to deliver for someone like that.
When do you get involved with it? When do they come to you with your role in marketing and say, like, this is happening and we need to put something together?
It depends really on where the band is signed. So like a lot of our stuff signed out of the US. So what happened is a few months before, once they're starting to put the campaign together, then we start getting all our information and timelines and get to hear music, see whatever we can, any artwork, aesthetics, and then we can start building our plan for the UK out of that. And then there's some other bands that's been signed to the UK, and we literally, start from day one with those kind of things. So at that point, we're doing the videos and we're making the artwork and we're putting together the timelines ourselves. So but you still get, plenty of time to set things up because there's a lot of stuff to sort before you can put a record out. So
with a band at that level, are you approaching it with a completely fresh campaign and you're all coming up with new ideas, or is there sort of like a template where you sort of like, I know these are the things that I need to hit, so let's try and move those into those boxes?
Do you mean like is it for each album, or do you mean like for different artists, or you just mean for Slipknot, say, for different albums?
For like different artists. So like you've got something as big as Slipknot and you've got something as big as Green Day. Is there sort of a template where you're like, I know I need to do the same things on this album as I did on this album because they're both huge? Or is it just like,
I think there's like
completely different
processes that you do that are the same. So I think things like print advertising is, and I know people say print is dead, but it's not. And there's some great publications out there. So we'll still be going, right, well, we might, do the right print ads for these kind of things, but there'll be completely different publications. So there'll be things, digital marketing, right, we'll do this, but everything has to be based around the album campaign and what the story of that album is, or the aesthetic of that album. So yeah, there's some basics, but I think even the way you do those is different depending on what that album is. And, it needs to be authentic. Yeah, I think you can't just, cut and paste just really boring stuff and put it out there. So there's some basic things, print ads, digital marketing, but even that is dependent on what the album is and what the artist is. But then I think around that, it's about building something else that's interesting, be it kind of some cool fan events or, I don't know, or an online kind of thing that you want to do. It just depends on what that record is, and you need to see what the record is, what the artwork's like, and that will give you the idea, I think, to give you that extra for the campaign.
Is it down to you to come up with that, or is that more of the band and the management coming to you with sort of ideas for you to facilitate?
Totally free. We've done some stuff in the past that we came up with. There's other things that, artists are saying, well, we're going to do this, or we're going to do this in, like, we're a US band, we'll do this in the US. Can you kind of replicate that idea in the UK? For Green Day, we did some really good stuff, which came from them because they were going to do it in America. But we did album listening parties at a load of indie stores kind of a week before, which is rare to have. A lot of those listening parties are the night before the album's out because everyone's so worried about anyone leaking or whatever. But we managed to do them on a Saturday, like a few days before, and the band and their management got together a really cool pamphlet, or like an A5 zine with all the lyrics and all kinds of really cool pics and stuff that we could give away, and some T-shirts and things like that. And it was really popular and kind of created a really good buzz around that record of just going into the album coming out. But we've done some we did some really odd things for that came from In the Office for we did this thing for Airborne, and if you probably know like that Joel's thing is like to climb up the rigging and kind of go on top of that. So we made like an 8-bit game. And you had to, I think it was when they were playing Download, and then you had to tweet kind of, the more tweets that we got, the more he would move up the rigging and then across it kind of thing. So, and we just came out with that, and it was just a bit of a giggle, and everyone kind of loved it. So
that's cool. Well, I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
With a band like Green Day and you're doing a listening party, does it feel like it's necessary when you're setting it up, or is there an element of just being like, it's Green Day, it's gonna be massive? Like, what's the point?
No, I don't actually think you can ever take it for granted. I think you have to do everything that you can, because even if it's massive, you still want to sell more records. Do you know what I mean? You want things to be bigger or better each time. And I also just it's not my thing to kind of just sit back on my laurels and we don't do that, we don't do that. It's like, but also it's exciting doing those things. I think seeing fans' reaction and people loving a record, like certainly like the Saviour's album that we just did, people love that record, and it really showed. Like week one, it's carried on selling. Obviously, and the band did all their stadium shows, sold out Wembley Stadium like in next to no time, and I think it's felt like a real massive refresh for that band. So I think doing all those things also helps that, if that makes sense. They also, they did a lot of really cool stuff. They came over and you must have seen the busking thing in the pub in Garden. Is that when a band like that gets involved and does things like that, everything feels like you want to push it as hard as you can, because they're doing kind of crazy stunts like that, which you wouldn't think they'd do.
No.
So yeah, I think it was really good, but it felt right to let fans hear that record early and kind of, because it's such a great record.
When you're coming up with a campaign like that, then is it a wildly different process to when you're trying to break a band if you've signed somebody and they're unknown?
I think so. Only in kind of, I guess in terms of the time that you have to take to get to where you want to be. I think if you've got an artist like Green Day or Slipknot, it's always quite a reasonably short cycle from when you launch, when you put the first track out and you launch. Although cycles are getting longer now because the industry's changed really, and you don't want your album to be the end of your campaign. You want to carry on. So things are changing anyway out the back of albums, but leading into it, I think, you probably have a much shorter lead into a record for an established artist. I think for a new artist that you're trying to break, I don't think you should ever rush anything. I think your plan should always be pretty fluid for them. And I think, but you should always be ready to push the button when you feel that it's right. So you can do a lot of setup work, you can get as much done as you can, but I think you've got to really have a considered plan for how you're going to add to their fan base over a period of time until it feels right to really step up to the next level.
What would an average campaign sort of look like for trying to build somebody? Where would you be looking to be like, do we need to focus on print, or do we need to focus more on online? Or
I think that depends on the band really. Like, have they got a really interesting story to tell in terms of will print or anything, online press, whatever, will they pick that up because there's something different about them or an extra story, or is it just a great live band that needs to be out there doing events like that? But I think if you're taking a band from zero, for instance, for me, and this is just like my opinion, I'm sure everyone would want to do it differently, but I always feel like, when we signed Creeper, for instance, we did 2 EPs for that band before we even started an album campaign. And actually there was, across those 2 EPs, there's like 10 songs, which is an album's worth of material, But that was over, I don't know, probably like a year or something, just trying to build that band to a place where you thought, well, now we can start thinking about building into an album. And it seems like such a weird, long process, but I think it's right, because you need to have those foundations for a band to go on and have a long career.
With a band like Creeper, are you in those conversations right at the very start?
For the EPs and the 2 albums that we did with them, you're working with that band from the scratch on what the aesthetic is. A lot of that stuff comes from them. They're an amazing band at building, as you know, like stories, and they have all this stuff worked out. So then it's really a case of them saying, this is what we want to do. How do we make this a thing, So you've got to be early in those conversations with bands. I think you've got to give bands as much freedom to be creative as possible, but there's also just some things that you've got to do to make sure they can build an audience properly.
If the band is growing and it does particularly well, how do you sort of reevaluate the marketing process to sort of expand on what's happening?
I don't think money is, I don't think it's like just chucking extra money at stuff. I don't think that necessarily works. So, I I I really pay attention weirdly to things like tube postering, and I don't know if that's because of my job or I just do anyway. But I'm always looking out for kind of bands and what bands are doing tube postering. And some things I see and I'm think, wow, that's kind of a weird move, because I don't think that band has that link with just the general public. So I think doing stuff like that doesn't really work for a band at a certain level. I think it's just trying to broaden the appeal out, and how when you get to a certain level, you want to just create more and more of a fan base. So it's like you got to work out how you can expand that from what you're doing already. I think most bands, when they start, obviously will have a niche audience, and I think it's the same with every band. It's like, unless you're a band that, say, has a huge hit and all of a sudden they explode, but like building a band from scratch is really difficult. But yeah, I think you got to keep thinking of ways of expanding that audience, and what marketing you can do, or how you can work with a band creatively, or how they can be creative about speaking to new different people each time. And I think that's a lot of, now I'd say that's really about having great content, because that's where so many people are finding stuff now. And I think you've got to have something really engaging each time, no matter where you are, at what level. Even if you're starting off, it's about grabbing people's attention, as you all know.
Has that really changed your job from when you started, with it being that, like, I guess a great photo shoot for a magazine would have been a big deal, and now it's more of a video for online or different things?
Yeah, I think when I started at Roadrunner, actually Roadrunner was pretty far ahead in terms of doing content. It was every time bands were in or whatever, there'd always be stuff that would be filmed, or loads of stuff be filmed to like have over a campaign. So it always had a really great sort of background in doing that, but it lived in a very different place, because it just lived on YouTube, and so that was where everyone just went. I think, and then you had Facebook, and so but I think now, obviously it just lives in a completely different place. It's all, it's reels and it's stories, but it's all about short form as well.
Yeah,
I think the best way to do it, I think, is kind of, you can create some really interesting longer form pieces, but you need to have some engaging short form stuff that will either tell that story in a quick way for people who want to digest it, or will point them to checking out something longer. We did a lot of stuff. We did the Empire State Bastard album, which is Simon from Biffy and Mike Bennett from Ocean Size, and Dave Lombardo on drums, which was great. But we did a lot of great content for them, but it was about finding like the really good kind of short pieces that you could put online to get people's attention first. So yeah, I think it's changed massively in what you create.
Do you plan that right from sort of the start, when you say, okay, we've got an album campaign, or we've got an album cycle? Do you sort of timeline what you're looking for, and you break it up into things that you need to sort of create, achieve, and then put out?
Yeah, I think so. I think sometimes as the campaign goes on, you get other ideas, or something pops up that was maybe unexpected, that one track starts to kind of do something or whatever, and you think, right, we can do something around this. So it's always a bit of flexibility and adding things at the last minute. But I think at the start, you do know, right, this is going to be the length of our campaign, because obviously once you've launched a record, you know when it's coming out, you know how long you've got, like how long that is, and what you've got to release in that time period. In between each of those releases, there's, what do you do to keep people, engaged with that artist? So I think you just come up with as many ideas as you can at the start. And for me, it's always great to just bank a load of really good content at the start and have that. And then yes, you'll timeline it. So things that are obviously much more about an in-depth look at the record itself, or the lyrics, or whatever, you probably leave till much later on, because it's a bit irrelevant to people when they haven't heard that album. But you can do lots of fun short form stuff that can lead you into the tracks. Or we did some really, fun kind of guitar playbacks for different singles and things like that. So yeah, we banked a lot of that stuff early, and just kind of, and had a good plan of how it was going to come out over the course of the campaign.
How did you measure the success of that campaign?
That one in particular, or just any campaign? Or
I guess both.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it depends on what it is, right? It's like for Green Day or Slipknot, you really are measuring it by, you think, right, we're going to try and get number one album for this, and that's where you want to go. And
is that set out as like the primary goal from the start?
Yeah, I think you've got to be ambitious enough that you know that band can get to that point. So why not have that as your main goal from day one? But I think for smaller artists, it's about growing their fan base, growing their sales, making sure you're growing their sales every time they do a record like that. You have to, you want to see a progression each time. So, you're speaking to more people and you've got bigger fan base. So I think that's always got to be your key point of whether it's a success is like, did we increase this band's fan base and did we sell records? Or if you're on your next record, did we sell more records than last time? Are we moving in the right direction for this band,
One of the really substantial sort of campaigns I imagine for you that you worked on was the My Chemical Romance reform.
That was a really weird one because obviously a lot of that just came out of the US, and we knew about it and I'd heard the track, and I'm a massive My Chems fan, so it was like incredibly exciting. And then obviously, the dates were coming and all that kind of stuff. But it was just really hard because you just knew this single was dropping and it's all about it. So yeah, I think it was just one of those campaigns that really just took on a life of its own. It's like the reaction to that record that they put out was incredible. It was so big, and it was an amazing song. But also to come back with kind of like a 6-minute epic track, just it was great. It was the band just doing it on their own terms. So it was mega exciting to work on. I think for that kind of thing, all you can do is just try and support it as much as you can in terms of marketing, but also, the job for the kind of marketing manager is to also make sure that everyone else in the team knows what's happening and knows what's coming. So you're working with the radio team and the pitching team for DSPs and press people and stuff. So it's just, making sure everyone's fed with information, everyone's got everything right. So to do that kind of record, but you have to keep it as top secret as possible. So, just telling people almost last minute sometimes. So, it was mega exciting, and it was a great campaign, and the shows were incredible. So it felt so special. Yeah.
Was everyone expecting the level of interest and excitement that it got?
I don't think anyone can know really that far on. It's like when a band's been gone for a while, will them coming back really be as exciting as you hope it will be? So I don't know. I think you hope it will be, I guess, is all I can think. But you can never guarantee anything like that.
So I'm guessing then, like, that's been decided in the US. You get a phone call or an email saying that it's happening. What's the process for you personally then to start working on that once you know it's happening?
Kind of set up with whoever's doing the press and radio and the people pitching it to the playlists and that kind of stuff, is just working with them, really make sure everyone's got everything they need, making sure we're all set up. These things are obviously it's like a very specific timed release that's coming out at this point, so everyone needs to be ready at that point to do their thing. So it is just make sure all the assets that you need and that everyone has absolutely everything that they have, because that the minute it's announced, like, everyone's going to run with the ball. So you need to make sure you're in control of what everyone gets in terms of press releases going out properly and things like that. So yeah, it's just ensuring all of that setup's done properly, and that is kind of 2 weeks before you're even getting to the release of a record. Yeah.
With Roadrunner being a subsidiary of Warner, does it feel like you're working in a major, or does it feel like you're working in an indie?
Obviously, I work in a major label office, so I get, yeah. I don't know. I think in terms of the ethos of the label, I still think it has that indie ethos, and I don't, what we do as to kind of comparison to a lot of what Warner Music does generally is very different.
Yeah.
So I think we're thinking about things in a genre label, indie label kind of way. But you obviously, you obviously plug into certain systems, so you can get some great support from certain things, like, you work with commercial team for sales and things like that. So that stuff's really good, and there's sync teams and that can help you on that kind of thing. So you have more things to plug in that help you outside of it. But I definitely feel like we've always done stuff still just as kind of what Roadrunner should be. Roadrunner's has got its own thing and its own brand. And I think you've always got to be faithful to that.
Yeah.
To keep that label brand alive properly.
If Roadrunner didn't have the backing of Warner, what would be the biggest change?
The Roadrunner Warner thing only really properly happened about 10, 11 years ago. So Roadrunner existed kind of on its own all that time, and was a hugely successful label anyway. So I don't really know if anything would be that different. I don't think the kind of bands that get signed would be any different. I think that's still done very much from a perspective of Roadrunner as a label and of its past history and what it stands for. I don't think there's anyone kind of thinking, we need to sign a different kind of artist. Certainly, I mean, if you just look at the bands that even the label has signed in more recent times, there's no kind of compromising because it's backed by Warner. So I don't really necessarily think that would change too much.
What's been your favourite campaign to work on then personally?
I'm really bad at having favourite things. I don't have like top favourite album or anything. I kind of have a ever revolving cast of favourite records. I really enjoyed it. I worked on Avenged Sevenfold's Hail to the King that was when I first moved, when Roadrunner first moved into Warner. So I started picking up working with some of these Warner bands as well, and that was a number one album. So for me, that was the first time I'd ever worked on an album that was number one. So it was like, personally felt, it's not my record or anything, but it still feels like a great achievement. Yeah. But also for a band like that to have a number one album in the UK felt so different and so special. So it just was just an exciting thing to work on from scratch, and also we really built that band big time in the UK over that record, and they were big anyway, and they were brilliant band, but it just felt like there was a real turn for that, and it was also quite fun because I remember we were up against an artist called Naughty Boy who was a real neck and neck. So I just we were just trying to get everyone on our scene to kind of push the Avenged Sevenfold album, and everyone really got behind it. It was fantastic. So I think that was a real early personal highlight for me. But I love working on so many of the bands. I've always, the first Creeper record I loved working on. It was amazing. The storytelling, all the weird late night video shoots that we had to do. But it was so ambitious, and it felt like really refreshing. So that was amazing. But then, just things like working on a band like Turnstile and seeing that band go from, I remember them playing downstairs at the Boston Music Room and to 250 people, and now look where they are, and it's only kind of like about 4 or 5 years that's happened in, and just to see that band really, really grow huge has been an incredible thing to work on as well. So yeah, just kind of there's lots of highlights. I loved working with Slash. I loved Guns N' Roses as a kid. It was amazing to get to work with Slash, and he's a wonderful person. So there's so many highlights.
With a campaign for something like Creeper versus Slipknot or Health King or something like that, is the big difference money in terms of like the resources that you're throwing at it, or is it almost the same with it just being like personnel coming up with ideas?
I think some things, like if you've got a much bigger album, you have to cover many more things. So therefore, budgets are different. I mean, it's not a secret that the budgets are going to be different for a huge band than they are for a smaller band. But I think in terms of like attention to detail and coming up with ideas, I think it's got to be the same across the board, because you want things to have a point of difference from just like we were talking about earlier, just kind of cut and paste a campaign in and just do the same things each time. I think you need to have that thing within your campaign that people can latch onto, that makes them really interested in it. So yeah, definitely, obviously there's a difference in budgets that you spend, but I think definitely in terms of ideas, I think you've got to have as many ideas as you can across both, whatever the size of the artist.
Where's the extra budget being spent then? Is it just like more magazines or?
Yes, I mean, it really depends campaign to campaign. I think, there's no hard and fast rule in any of that stuff.
If then everything's constantly changing and you're working on dozens and dozens of campaigns, how do you keep it creative?
I think you just got to pay attention all the time to what's going on around you and what other things are happening as well. I think, you've got to keep an understanding of all new technologies, new platforms, new ways of doing things, and then you've got to work out how to utilize those in a different way for your own campaign. But I think you can, I'm always looking at what other bands are doing, regardless of, it's if you think, well, that's a really cool thing, they could apply that in a completely different way to what we're doing, stuff like that. But also really keeping a tab on what other industries are doing. I think that's a real key. And you see, lots of fashion stuff or skate stuff. They do some really interesting things and different drops of, merch and all those kind of things. I think looking at the way different industries do what they do really helps you in trying to bring something fresh and new to what you're doing. Because otherwise, it is that thing of like, right, these are the basic things you've got to do, but what's going to be different? And I think the only way to do that is just keep abreast of what everyone else is doing.
With the different campaigns, although the primary goal then is to get the album sales, I guess, what are the other sort of metrics or targets that you're trying to hit if like merch is coming into it and things like that?
You're trying to sell, if you do have merch with a band as well, you want to sell that merch as much as possible. You want to, you want that band to just get bigger and bigger live as well. There's nothing to do with you in terms of, revenue streams or whatever. Seeing bands get bigger and bigger live, that's really helping you and affecting what happens at your end. So I think, I also think like album sales per se is kind of an indicator, but I think there is a lot more around it. I think you can feel like when there's a buzz happening on a band, and it might not translate into album sales right now, but I think you can know that it would be coming at some point because you can feel that it's about to tip over. So I think there's some stuff that isn't really measurable. There's more of a gut instinct as well, I think.
Yeah. Are things like online followers more important to a new band than an established one? Like a Slipknot going, we really need to grow our Instagram, or are they just going?
I think they probably do want to grow their Instagram, because I think the bands always want to grow their following, and there's a whole every couple of years there's a new generation of people coming through. You have kids who are getting into metal, and you want them to listen to bands like Slipknot. So I don't think anyone's really ever sitting on their laurels and thinking, we don't need to do it. I also actually think that the amount of online followers you have sometimes can actually also be a bit of a misdirection. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I certainly think in terms of, if you look at things like Spotify, monthly listener figures and all that, and things can look really impressive, but that's sometimes isn't a true reflection of how big a band actually is. I actually think that kind of the key to how big bands are is like when they go and play live, what rooms they're playing, how many people they're playing to. I think, there's a hard and fast thing there where someone's not just clicked a like and they like that band and it's on their feed and they've paid money to go out and watch that band. I think that's the true, real measure of how much a band is growing, is how their live thing goes.
Is part of your job thinking about that and worrying about that, or is it just a case of like, that's the promoter's problem?
Oh no, we always try and work closely with promoters to help in any way. It's kind of symbiotic relationship, I guess, because as bands grow live, their record sales grow, and then record sales get bigger, more fans, and they're live, it really, each thing feeds back into the other. So it's really important to keep an eye on both and to work with, everyone involved to make sure each thing gets bigger and bigger each time. So I've worked with promoters that will really help support your album campaign, and then vice versa. When we're doing stuff and there's live stuff, we always make sure we really push it heavily for them as well. It has to be done that way. Everyone's got to work together, because the goal that everyone wants is this band just to get as big as possible.
Yeah. When you've got a really established band, then Slipknot, Green Day, something like that, is there sort of like an equal divide, or is it weighed more one way than the other, with you being sort of like, we need to keep the new fans, we need to attract new fans, or we need to keep the old ones happy?
I think you've always got to super serve your fans. It's like, they're the people that have been with you all this time. And so I think you've got to always make sure. I think any band that just thinks, well, we're going to move on, we're going to get, grow all these people. If you just ignore the people that have got you there, I think that's not going to do you any good at all.
Yeah.
You've really got to make sure that your fans are rewarded. And I don't mean that just from like sitting in a record label perspective, because I'm a music fan as well, and so it's just like, you know how it feels when your favorite band is doing something and it means so much to you, but you want to make sure that you're hearing about that first. So I think first and foremost, make sure that you really super serve your core fan base and make sure they're happy and make sure they get everything they can get. And then I think then the challenge is to expand that each time. you know, and that's obviously harder for bands that have had a longer career, you know. It's because just the way of the industry, kind of all bands can tend to get to a point, and then that's, you know, that's their kind of point.
If there was a moment in your personal career that you could go back to and relive, what would you want to again?
I don't know. Do you mean like work-wise or just generally? I don't know.
Just sort of a high point. Well, we've had a couple of different answers where some people have been like, well, this one time I really fucked up. And I'd go back and sort that out. And some people have just been like, this was a good time.
I think when I first started at Roadrunner, I absolutely loved that period. It was something so new and so fresh for me. A whole brand new bunch of people to work with who are like, you know, some of my dearest friends to this day, and incredible at what they do. And it just felt like such an amazing moment. You were saying about doing the tour bus thing, that kind of feel like you'd made it. It was like, actually, that was the thing that I felt like I'd actually made it. Not, you know, I mean, it sounds like a terrible phrase, but you know,
but
it
like,
made me feel like, oh, right, all that stuff I've done for all these years, this is what I really always wanted to do, and now I'm doing it. And it's like, this is amazing. So I think probably, that just that starting period of getting that job and starting to work at that label, I think it was just so much fun, and it was a pretty intense time as well. But it was amazing.
Have there been any other moments since then where you've obviously worked on lots of huge things, but you've had a point where you go, fuck, as if I was part of that?
I mean, I hate, you know, saying, oh, I work with this side, but honestly, the Slash stuff was incredible. It's like I said, I grew up just absolutely adoring Guns N' Roses. And so I just remember meeting him for the first time, and it is a real pinch me moment, because you're kind of like, wow, is this that guy, you know?
Yeah.
And then he's just really cool, really nice, and really, you know, he's got some amazing stories, of course. But I think, that's like a real incredible moment. But you know, I think also even though working with smaller bands and just seeing, that was a really amazing moment, was when Gojira did Ali Pali last year.
Yeah.
I can't remember now when it was, 2 years ago. But that, again, for that band to get to that level of playing the music that they're playing, you know, we had a top 10 album with that record as well. You kind of think it's wild. Obviously, they've just done the Olympics, and that's an even more of a
insane.
Yeah. But yeah, you're just kind of feeling proud of those moments where you're involved in something that's becomes like truly successful, you know. But there's even just weird small things of just working with small artists. And remember we worked Milk Teeth for a bit, and just having them on like the cover of Kerrang, stuff like that, or even just getting a play on the Rock Show. Sometimes you're like, that just feels mega exciting as well, because you know that you're on the right path to what you want to achieve.
Have you had the opposite, where you thought this campaign is sick, and then it's gone out and it's just nothing's happened? It's just flaps, and you sat there being like, fuck, I missed the mark on that.
I don't know. I mean, I think you kind of know I think you know early on. You know, because now there's a whole world of pre-order. You know, especially in what we do, there's a lot of physical sales. So you're getting a gist of things quite early on before you even get to the album release. So I think sometimes you're like, this is just not going that great. And then, but then your thing is, well, how do I fix this? And sometimes you can't, you know, you've got to try your hardest, but sometimes it is going to be what it's going to be. So yeah, I think, I mean, I've definitely worked on some campaigns that weren't as successful as you thought they were going to be. But you got to kind of, do you know what the thing is? You've got to learn from that. And I think that's the key. I hear we're talking a lot about things like that, you know, don't be afraid to fail. And it is actually massively scary to do that. But sometimes if you don't try these things and they don't work, if you don't try them, then you're never going to know if they work.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't work, but then you've got to learn from that and go, right, either what did I do wrong, or what happened that was wrong about that we can do next time, or is it just a really terrible idea and we should just stay away from it, you know? So I think there's obviously campaigns, that haven't gone great, but it's about kind of taking lessons from those and then applying them later on.
Have you been able to do that with future albums? Like, you've worked on something with a band, whether it's gone well or not, you've had an idea during that period and you thought, it's too late now. but next time around, there's been something in you've been able to put it in?
There's definitely some things where they're time sensitive. I mean, I probably can't even tell you any specific examples of it, but there's definitely, I think the thing is, there's definitely things that you learn from campaigns, and you apply that to the next thing, and you think, well, or even not from just my own campaigns, seeing what other people are doing and seeing what they, what stuff they do. There's a big thing now, obviously, for kind of in stores and stuff like that. So, you learn that as you go, that they're really effective, to help get bands out there and in front of people. And that was never really a thing a few years ago. So things are always changing. And then sometimes those things come up and you think, well, yeah, it's too late in this campaign to do that. But we'll try that on another artist or the next album for that artist.
Are there any things that sort of used to work that you think it's a shame that it doesn't anymore?
I think quite a lot of stuff. Oh, do you know, actually, I tell you something that we did used to have that I think it's just changed in because of the internet as such. But the Roadrunner had this really amazing like street team, and that was obviously a lot of kind of physical stuff back then, and it was getting really involved at gigs and things like that. And I think that kind of went away a lot with the internet and with social media platforms. I think that's been superseded by that. So, but they were already fun things to do, like getting personally involved with fans, and then being able to get involved in campaigns as well. So,
is that something that's more important later on, when there's a big fan group, or sort of right at the start?
Like fan groups?
Just the fan groups in general, because I guess if there's not that many fans, is it as important as making them feel connected when there's lots?
I think you want fans to be into your band like massively from day one. I don't think you can go, well, we're only going to bother with them when we only get so many amount of people. And I actually think, that fans are such great advocates for the bands they love. Everyone's always telling people, oh, this band, I love this band. So I think it's mega important, especially for up and coming bands, to have a really engaged fan group that want to tell people about how great your band is. I think it's really important for you. I think that this kind of nothing more powerful than your friend telling you, oh, this band's really great, have a listen to it, I'm really into them. So I think it's really important.
I think there's some obvious examples of that making a really big difference to bands, like Creeper being one, where people are so passionate that there's a lot of word of mouth with them. What advice then would you give to anybody that was starting off in the industry and wanted to work in marketing?
Grab any opportunity that comes your way with two hands. Like, don't let anything slip by because you think, I don't know about that. I think you've just got to be really open-minded to anything that comes along. I think it's really important. From my experience, with the most important thing was getting your foot in the door, and starting to meet people and starting to build a network of people that you could then move on to different things with. But I'd also just say, like, don't kind of rush. Don't rush ahead. I think it's easy to think when you start off, you don't get the most exciting things to do in any job, right? So, but you've got every task that you're given, even if it seems a bit mundane, I think you've just got to be really hardworking and really diligent and show that you're massively willing to get involved and to get your hands dirty. And I think that makes such a huge difference to the people around you. But I also think, like, pay attention to what's going on. Don't be afraid to ask questions if you don't understand stuff or you want to learn about things, because people are really happy to share their knowledge. And I'd also say always make sure you go to, if you're invited to gigs or events, like, always go to that stuff, because that's how you meet so many new people, and obviously in music, work in marketing, you work for a record label, but so many people, agents, journalists, DJs, promoters, it's not just the people in your office that are your contacts in your network. The industry's such a big thing that it's really important to be out there and meeting people all the time.
I think we've pretty much covered everything. Is there anything you wanted to end on or anything you wanted to mention?
Not at the minute. I've got some really interesting stuff that's coming next year that's mega exciting, but I'll have to just kind of wait. Yeah, it becomes public knowledge.
Cool. That's fair, man. Well, thank you for coming in and talking to us. It's been awesome having you here.
No, thanks very much. It's been really good.
Thank you to everyone that's watched. If you want to listen to us, we're on Spotify, and we'll catch you next time.